All right, sounds good. Well, my legal name is Heather, but I go by Winter. Um, and I came on this idea it was about 2019. Summer 2018, I moved up here to Alaska. I had met a man online and we got engaged. And so I moved up here to be with him, and he had a dog walking business. And he would go pick up the dog at the home, and he would pick up like 5 to maybe 7 dogs, drive them to the trail, and run with them for about an hour, and then take them home and drop them off. And it was just a really simple, like, business plan to begin with. But by the time I got up here, he had been doing it for a couple of years, and he was starting to run into some challenges that he didn't quite know how to deal with. So I'm a problem solver. I have a small business, a degree um, in small business management. And so first I just started, going through and streamlining the different systems and processes. But then I started going out with him to see what his process was, and I was a little bit uncomfortable with the risks there because these dogs were not formally off leash trained. Most of them had naturally good recall because they had high food drive, and he would bring treats and they were praise driven. So he had, your golden retrievers and poodle mixes and Australian shepherds and border collies, but then with some husky mixes, and some of the more independent breeds, you know, Akita. I'm trying to remember. He had a Karelian bear dog, and these were causing problems because they weren't coming when they were called. And he was like, "Ugh." So I did not have much of a background in dogs, so I just started researching the different breeds, and if they were a mix, I would research all the breeds, and try to understand like what their drives are, like what was this dog created for, um, what temperament traits, what are their strengths and weaknesses. And so I decided that I needed to start how to train dogs because it was a great little business, but the risk was just really high, like to take dogs out that hadn't been formally trained. And he didn't have an assessment process. Like when he got a new client, he would just go pick up the new dog. He started having issues with dogs who were selective or straight up aggressive. And so I developed a process of, like, first we do an assessment process to determine if they're dog friendly. If they're really, safe around new dogs, then we assess their off leash reliability in a fence setting. And some of them just passed really easily and incorporated into the pack really easily, and others we had to work with a lot more. So that really challenged me, but I was learning so much about different dog breeds, and I was just really, like, thriving in that challenge. But I'm a problem solver, and one of the problems that I saw was a lot of these dogs were not really companion dogs. They were working dogs that people purchased to be companion dogs, and they were not working them. And I realized that this was actually super common, that these working breeds were being bred by people who were not working the dogs. They weren't selecting for particular traits. They just had two pure breed dogs that they would breed together. And whether they were papered or not, a lot of the people in this area are breeding non-registered dogs. They're not really selecting for the traits they were bred for. They're kind of trying to select for companion traits, but they're not really. They're kind of like, I don't know. Some of them really have no business being bred at all, honestly. So there are a lot of dogs. Alaska has a lot of dogs. People love their dogs in Alaska. We do have, off leash laws. So that was a thing. I was feeling like we need to follow the laws. We need to make sure these dogs are trained and that we go to only the places they're allowed off leash. So there's that process of learning to train dogs. I actually started fostering dogs. So I'd take a dog that needed a home, hadn't been trained at all, just do some basic home training with it, and mainly get it working in the pack with us or running in the pack. And a lot of the problem behaviors resolved. But it was just such that I was noticing that there are so many people who were not giving their dog that outlet. They were expecting their dogs to behave without any training, without any really intense working or exercise or mental stimulation. And so I started looking at what are the dog breeds that can actually fit that expectation well. And there were so few. There are so few really stable companion breed temperaments. Okay, none of the dogs really fit what I really liked in the look of a dog. There were some breeds I'm like, I really like this about them, but I don't like this about them. And this other breed I like this, but I don't like that. So just in the aesthetics, there isn't even a dog that I'm like totally obsessed with. There's a lot of dogs that I'm like a little bit obsessed with, but I would change them. And usually when you get into you find a dog breed that you're obsessed with, it's like you like everything. And if you don't, you keep looking. And people just like, well, you just haven't found your breed. Well, I kept looking and looking and looking until I exhausted. I don't think what I want is out there in temperament and behavior. And so I started just kind of saving photos of dogs that I liked the look of. And I'm like, wow, all of these are like mixes. And some of these mixed breed dogs, their aesthetics are a lot better than any of the pure. But the two pure breeds that you would mix to get this look, I wouldn't want the temperament of that. So it just started to become a lot more like, wow, this would be really complicated. The likelihood of me actually finding a dog that I really like the look of and the temperament of is so low that I should just create it. And I don't know, I started thinking, is there really a niche for what I would want? So I wrote it down and I started asking people, this is what I would want in a dog. Do you think there's other people? And I would post online, and I got a lot of negative feedback about the idea of developing a new breed. There's already enough dogs. We don't need to, and I'm like, but there's not a breed that I like. So maybe there's one that you like, and that's great. But what about for people like me who can't find what they're looking for? I just think there's no logical reason that we should be done creating breeds just because there are a lot of breeds already. That's just what we do. Is there's a new niche, we fill it with a new dog breed. And I don't know, I think in my personality, this desire to problem solve, a really analytical mind could be a companion with a lot less frustration, right? It's getting its needs met because it doesn't have the need and the drive of all these working breeds. It's just easily content. First of all, those dogs would be happier in those scenarios where they're expected to be that. And then the dogs that would have had to fill that are not going to be able to, those dogs are not going to suffer. Maybe fewer working dogs will need to be bred if there are more companion breeds available. Anyway, so I started thinking about what would have the widest appeal to me and the type of people I'm looking. Let me know if I break up. So the niche that I wanted to fill is lazy dog owners. The type of clients that we were getting for our dog walking program were those type. They don't invest in training their dog for the most part. Very, very little. They don't want to take a lot of time with long walks or heavy exercise, like a yard. We got a yard, they can run around in the yard. We got kids, they run around with the kids, but they kind of expect the dogs to just exist and be happy and not have a lot of demands. So these are non-dog centric people, and there's a lot of them, right? Um, these are not the people who the really I'd say sporty dogs, for instance, are wanting to place there. They're like, oh, okay, we were looking for an experienced dog owner. We're looking for someone who gets involved with their dogs. There are very few people like that in the grand scheme of things. If you look at the general population, most people who have dogs do not do all that stuff. And they just had the expectation their dogs are just going to be fine, whether they're in the country or the city, or they're living in an apartment or a house with a yard. They just kind of expect dogs to be like cool with everything, and they're not. So many people are just totally surprised, shocked, or even disappointed how much a lot of dogs need in order to be well adjusted and happy. And so I'm like, okay, well, there's already dog breeds that exist that are more cat-like in temperament, and that's kind of what I like. The super needy, like golden retriever or Australian shepherd, or I don't know, lab, that it's constantly like nudging you for affection, or like whining or panting, pacing until you petting them. They're just not happy unless they're being pet. Those were really anxiety inducing for me. Because like I was always very like productivity oriented, and you can't be that productive when you're sitting there petting a dog. So I'm like, I don't have time to pet you. Why don't you just go play? You got other dog friends here, just go play. I wanted a dog that would just be playing with other dogs, be more dog centered rather than just focused all on me. Yeah, I enjoy seeing dogs be happy and playful. What I'm looking for. So more of a pack-oriented dog. So I tended to like a lot of husky and husky mixes. I noticed that they were very social because they were raised to operate in a pack setting, and so they tend to really enjoy interacting. So the first dogs that I fostered and trained and learned their temperaments and how to train them were huskies and husky mixes primarily. And I liked how they were independent and more stoic and not as derpy, I guess, exuberant, emotional. I tended to be drawn towards really calm and stoic dogs, actually. And but those breeds that did exist, I'm thinking like Shiba Inu, Akita, Chow, for example. Those are described as cat-like, independent, aloof, more stoic. Of course, there's a range in the temperament traits, but the ones that I really liked, they also have really thick coats. In my opinion, that level of coat care is just way too much. I have a lot of. I'm really in tune with the animal's comfort, and these dogs have such profuse undercoat. Even in Alaska, like if you're inside with the heater on in the wintertime and you're comfortable, your dog's not going to be comfortable. They're so hot. And you see them panting and they're laying on the cool tile. Like I've seen like them try to climb in the refrigerator because they're so hot. And they're always wanting to go outside, and people are like, come inside, it's cold. But like that's where they're comfortable because they've got all that fur. And so I'm like, I don't want to have all that undercoat, and it just creates a lot of work with the grooming. You have to like, they will mat if you don't like groom them really well. Chows have just ridiculously thick coats. It's so unnecessary. They're cute for sure. They're very fluffy, but I'm like, okay, what's the most comfortable for the dog and functional? Like, what does a coat need to do? It needs to protect them from the cold and the rain, so be water resistant. Be thick enough that they can go out in really cold weather, because I live in Alaska, and not be cold. Their paws need to be tough enough that their paws don't get cold easily. And so a thicker, slightly longer coat. I see a lot of bullies up here, and I just think they've got to be so miserable in like near 0 degree weather because their skin, they're practically naked. Their skin is so thin and their fur is so thin. Um, they've got all that. They have very little fat to insulate, right? So um, the coat was really important to get a functional coat that was wash and wear, wouldn't mat, wouldn't smell, no trapping odors, no dander and oil. Like this coat doesn't exist, but it has existed. That's why I know it's possible. Um, very, very rarely a single coat lab is born. They don't have any undercoat. They don't have that oil, that smell that labs do. I've found a couple people, just a handful of people who've had these dogs. I've also found people who have mixes that have this coat. And, um, I didn't know how I was going to create the coat, but I was just looking. I'm like, I've got to find dogs that have easier coats. And so I put word out to a girl who was trapping mixes, village mixes, in one of the small Alaskan towns because they had begun shooting the stray dogs. There was such an epidemic of strays, um, freezing cold, becoming aggressive, starving, whatever. People were not caring for their dogs. And so she'd capture them and send them to like Anchorage or the Valley where there were more people and they would go into rescues. So I actually rescued a few of those or like fostered them, trained them, and found them homes. And she contacted me with one. She's like, I think you'll like this one. It was a 6-month old puppy, and she was just really sweet. And I fell in love with her. She had just the most resilient temperament, and she had this really rare coat. It was just like such a find that was so rare that I was just like, this has to be meant to be. Her coat does not smell. She does shed, but she has very little undercoat, so it's a coarse top coat that she sheds, and it just doesn't stick on you. Like it'll fall right off into the floor. So there is this seasonal aspect, but it's hard to know also because there's the blowing of the coat when she goes into heat. And all dogs blow their coat. Um, but so it's hard for me to tell. So I've produced an offspring from her that has an even better coat. It crossed her with a Tibetan Spaniel, and I had no idea the Tibetan Spaniel would actually um, be able to cross with her genes, produce this coat. But basically, he's 7 months old now, and still not shedding. The other puppies in the litter are shedding, but the two that I happen to keep are not. But I do see a little bit of undercoat, so I do expect that they will shed, except they're very just so much less undercoat. It's almost like all coarse top coat. So that's what I'm going for. And there's just some unidentified gene that she has, and that a few other breeds have in the gene pool, but it's very rare. For instance, Moody's. I have a breeding friend who has a Moody stud that she's going to let me use, who doesn't shed. He's got very soft fur. It's not as thick as typically a Moody is, and it does not shed like ever. There's also been some, of course, there's the furnished breeds that don't shed, but I don't want the furnishing gene. So I'm actually going to be collaborating with a lot of different people, a lot of different breeds to experiment to get this coat. There is one breed, well, there's a couple breeds that do have it reliably. A long-haired Chihuahua would have similar coat, very little undercoat. It's smooth, but it's not as coarse as what I'm looking for. It's too fine, and it does shed. There's also a very rare breed. It's a Dutch breed called, in English, it's the Dutch Tulip Hound. I can't remember what it's called in Dutch, but they're very uh, snobby about those breeds, and I may not be able to get one, but they have a single coat without an undercoat. And it again is too fine. I'm wanting a coarser coat, but I already know what breeds that I plan to use to get this coat. Is, and it's not going to be a coat that I'm going to, like, I want other people who are developing other breeds to be able to use my breed and have this coat because it's going to be such a good quality that is going to be very desirable. Because right now you've got two types of coats, really. You've got double coat that's high shedding. It's typically seasonal shedding, 2 times a year, heavy shedding. Some of these dogs are shedding year round. And then you've got the furnished breeds that are supposed to be hypoallergenic that don't shed, but their coats are a lot higher maintenance. They need to be brushed. They need to be trimmed sometimes. Their coats almost always look scraggly unless they've been recently groomed. They've got these beards that water and dirt and food get caught in. Not a fan. And I don't even like the texture. It's a wiry, or if it's curly, don't like it at all. I like a very smooth, soft, flexible. Like the first puppy that I have, the 7-month-old male that I have, his coat is just a dream to pet. There is no odor. There is never any dirt. Like, it always looks perfectly clean. Never needs to be brushed. You can run your hand forward and back, and it just feels like light as air, like smooth. It always looks shiny. So I know that I've got a good start. It's just a matter of continuing to perfect it. The coat is very, very important. Temperament wise, I'm doing something different than I think any other breed developer. So typically in a temperament, you have a narrow list, a short list of temperament traits that they, whether they're outgoing and happy and non-aggressive and friendly with new people, those kinds of things. But once you start getting too specific about traits, like, for example, potty trains really easily, or knows how to avoid danger, right? Because they have good discernment, knows how to read body language in both humans and dogs. That's discernment. Extraordinary traits that when people like have a dog with these extraordinary traits, they think, wow, this dog's just like one in a million. Those dogs exist, but they're very rare, and I'm searching for them, and I don't care what breed they are or what they look like, as long as they have this particular trait, and try to capture these rare traits. I think discernment is one of the biggest ones because it allows a dog to both, recognize danger, know what to do in certain situations, read body language of a dog. For instance, a dog that doesn't have discernment would be, let's say, a dog aggressive chow, for example. They look so pessimistically at new dogs that approach them that they just assume that dog is going to hurt me, so I need to aggress to protect myself. That dog doesn't have good discernment because not all dogs are out to get them. On the other extreme, you got some, let's say, Labrador optimistic about meeting new dogs, and they think every new dog they meet is going to love them. And they are so slow to pick up on body language from another dog that sometimes they will harass or just annoy another dog to the point where another dog will just attack them, and they're like, oh, what? I didn't do anything. They're clueless. They're really derpy. Not all of them. I'm making generalizations, but those are two generalizations where discernment, emotional intelligence would really help them, because I want a dog that is not not erring on the too suspicious side and not erring on the too optimistic side, but is right in the middle with enough discernment to know, to be able to read, okay, that dog actually really wants to meet me and they're not going to be aggressive. Oh, that dog does not want to meet me, you know? That was one of the hardest traits. I felt like dogs either had one extreme or another, and it was very hard to find dogs that were in the middle that could tell when they needed to back off from a dog, or how they needed to change their play style, adjust their play style to different dogs, for example. Like this dog I can play rough with, this dog I have to play gentle with. Um, so when I look for a breeding candidate, I am looking for certain aesthetics. There are certain breeds that I will just never consider because they're too far away from what I'm looking for. For instance, a basset hound, they have dwarfism. I don't want dwarfism. I've got a lot of long ears. I'm going for prick ears. They have really like saggy skin. I'm going for tight skin. They have the long body, of course, that's due to the dwarfism, but also their drives, being a hound dog and having very environmentally focused and not very human focused. So there's plenty of breeds that like they're just not on my list of consideration at all, but there's so many. For instance, just if you look at the group of Spitz breeds, there are so many. You've got Siberian Huskies, Alaskan Huskies, Chows, Akitas, Samoyed, Norwegian Elkhound. I mean, I can just go on and on. There's so many of them. And from the Spitz, though, I'm particularly looking for dog socialness because, like, for instance, with Alaskan Huskies, or I had an Alaskan Husky crossed with a Siberian Husky, almost the best mix because Siberian Huskies are beautiful, right? They've got blue eyes, they've got nice, like, form, especially the show Siberian Huskies. The Alaskan Huskies have better temperaments and better health, better diversity. And so crossing the two of those, you get the best of both you can. And yeah, that really good social intelligence from a line that was bred to have that because they were raised to work together in a pack. There's not a lot of pack dogs. I think of beagles, you know, they're raised to live in large numbers together harmoniously and not fight if they're from hunting lines. But then you got to deal with hunting drive. So with Huskies, you've got to deal with wanderlust. And some of them are not very handler focused. So the one that I had was perfect balance. She did have a little too much wanderlust. But then you can cross, for example, with an Akita or a Chow, but then you're bringing in the potential for dog aggression. So balancing the dog socialness from the Husky with the tendency for aggression, you're able to bring in more bone and muscle. So like that's the kind of problem solving that I'm doing. Like, okay, with this breed, you have these flaws. We could balance it with this breed over here, but we're going to bring in these flaws. But what you do is you select the offspring that have the best of both parents and the least of the bad traits, and you go on from there. And that's just how dog breeding is done. The selection process creates what you are prioritizing. People are not prioritizing that. They don't care enough. They're like, oh, you want a Chow, you're going to risk that you're going to have dog aggression. I mean, certainly there are some breeders who, for instance, I found a Malamute breeder who has two, a male and a female. Neither of them have same-sex aggression, which is really rare in Malamutes. Like most Malamutes have same-sex aggression. So you just have to know what the dog breed's strengths and weaknesses are. What are the physical traits they're going to bring that you're looking for? And I want to use a wide range from large sizes down to small sizes because dogs that have been consistently bred in a small gene pool have a narrow number of traits. They just, a lot of them have these like little dog syndrome and other flaws. For instance, patellas. Like a lot of breeders haven't been selecting for really sound patellas in small dogs, and they're prone to patellas that slip. So, and of course, in large breeds, you've got hip dysplasia. So each size, each category of dog has its strengths and weaknesses. And I'm trying to eliminate as many of those as possible by just breeding for a moderate appearance and a moderate, flexible temperament. Yeah, just like a moderate, like when you cross two extremes, you get in between, and that's what I want to do. Like, um, the way I want to do that is by considering, okay, the trait that I really like in this line, how is it going to be prone to become too exaggerated? For example, I like independent dogs that are fairly stoic and a little aloof, but that can tend towards stubbornness, and nobody likes a stubborn dog. So I need to have at least enough food drive there that I can use high value food to overcome stubbornness. So I have a Tibetan Spaniel mix prospect right now. She is very opinionated and independent, and she has a not high enough of a food drive. So therefore, the result is she's a stubborn little dog. I still love her, and I'll probably still use her, but I need to pair her with a very food motivated dog so that I can get. So some of them will tend towards low food motivation, some will tend towards high food motivation, and some will be in the middle. And those ones that are in the middle is what I want to select for that particular line. In order to also make sure there's a little bit of care for a human. Like a dog can be so independent that they literally could like go live out in the wild and not care. And I want a dog that is that independent. Obviously, that's way too independent. So I'm also going to be using breeds that have more human focus, but I'm going to concentrate that in another line so that when my independent line, I'm calling them the easy line, gets a little too independent, I can cross to the therapy line that is much more human focused. And that way I can produce two different temperaments for two types of buyer. Like someone who wants a dog that doesn't need a lot of attention, you can get the easy line. If you want a dog that's great for therapy, who likes to be a lap dog, you can get the therapy line. And they'll have, different concentrations of dog breeds, because therapy, you're going to use more like retriever, spaniel type of dogs. But in order to get the look, they're going to also have to have some of the spits and some of the bully to add the bone and muscle that I want. So, yeah, basically these different lines are supposed to balance each other and outcross to each other. So I'm developing this with a long-term goal of being able to outcross in order to keep these lines genetically diverse, but consistent in appearance. And most of the traits are going to be similar. There's just going to be those few that are different, mainly learn tricks. People like to train their dogs. That would be the sporty line. And so dogs that have a little more food drive, a little more handler focus, but also a little more energy, that's going to be the line where I'm going to concentrate those traits. And then, so there's like, I just mentioned 3 different lines: easy, therapy, sporty. Then there's a 4th line that's more like just a kind of a guardy dog, like people who want to have a chow or a pit bull or something to look intimidating, but not to have the bite risk, just to kind of have scary dog privilege. But so those would be a lot more aloof, intimidating. So yeah, my goals are very, very expansive, and some people think there's no way I'll be able to accomplish any of them, but if I can accomplish a fraction of them, I'll be happy. So I'm collaborating with a lot of different breeders to work towards specific goals. For instance, I have a few breeders who we want to work together on the coat because that's really important to us. And then other breeders who are like, oh, really, I really like the build that you're going for and the size and some of the temperament traits, but they want to kind of go in a little different direction. So yeah, there's a lot of planned pairings next few years. Like I've planned like years in advance, but things always change and it's always new challenges and fun stuff. So that was, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your ideal sizes and what you think
Yeah. Yeah.
you're trying
So,
to accomplish on that end?
right. So there's a lot of like really small, like I'd say under 10 pounds, maybe going up to 15 is pushing it. But I'm wanting more like 15 on the low end and 30 on the high end. I want to do kind of a wide range because you can tell in the litter which ones are going to track, especially when you do the DNA test, which ones are going to track small and medium and large. So people are going to be like, oh, I want one of more of the smaller ones, or maybe they want one of the bigger ones. But I don't want to get a super narrow range because again, anything you're narrowing down to very, very specific ranges, for example, exact like muzzle length or ratios or those kinds of things, is a problem because it's not necessary. Okay, people like a range of appearances. And I think it's becoming more common to like more variety and uniqueness in your dog rather than a cookie cutter appearance. In times past, older people, more traditional people, have wanted things that kind of fit. Like we're in a club and we've got this dog that looks exactly like all these other people's dogs. That mentality is kind of becoming old-fashioned, and people are kind of aspiring more unique. Like I've got this dog that nobody else has, or this. Look at these markings; they're so unique and rare. It's this really kind of uniqueness now that is becoming more appealing, and I want to. That is really good. Like the more identical a dog is, the more inbred it has to be in order to have that look, the more you're going to deal with inbreeding depression when your coefficient of inbreeding goes up really high. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to develop a dog breed, because most dog breeds were developed in a closed gene pool, and I do not plan to do that. I plan to use assortative breeding primarily to develop type rather than inbreeding. So assortative breeding is where you're looking for dogs that look similar, but they're not closely related. For example, if someone in American Bullies, this is some form of assortative breeding. Now they're all related, so it is all inbreeding no matter what. But someone who's like, okay, like I got a bunch of like bossy and a bunch of whatever, right? I can't even remember all the razor, gaudy, whatever. They want a similar look, but unrelated lines. That's not scatterbreeding. You're still being consistent in what you're selecting for, but you're just not doing this tight line breeding. And it's really the same as inbreeding. They try to distinguish it by like, oh, there's different, like if you're specific, this is inbreeding, not line breeding. I don't know. To me, it's all too close because it's a matter of homozygosity versus heterozygosity. And that's the big issue, is the more homozygosity you have, the more you're going to have recessive traits popping up that have been unidentified and not concentrated yet. And they're going to be spreading through the gene pool. And this mentality that you can purify a gene pool by health testing, keeping the gene pool closed, is just erroneous. There's no way to scientifically do that, because you eliminate one bad gene, you're creating a bottleneck, and eventually another bad gene is going to start becoming concentrated. You eliminate that, you're further bottlenecking. It's just a really bad idea. Eventually there's going to be so much inbreeding depression that the breed will go as extinct. That has happened. So they've had to recreate breeds. I don't ever want that to happen to this breed. I want the lines to be distinct enough genetically that they would be considered distinct breeds. Like you can test and be like, oh, this is a Pixie dog, but it's specifically an easy line Pixie dog. Like that's how distinct that I want them to be. They'll be developed with different breed percentages. Some of them won't have any of the a breed that another line has maybe a lot of, but they'll look similar because there are enough dogs that look similar that you can get the same look with a different mix. In fact, I have found dogs that look identical almost to each other. They look like they could be siblings and they maybe have a few of the breeds in common, but totally different mixes, completely unrelated. And so that is possible to do. They have core breeds in common, and then you're going to have those specific temperament traits being created from, for instance, I wouldn't ever have a chow, for example, in a sporty line. There's nothing compatible about it. A chow, they're not high energy, they're not very handler focused, they're not very food motivated. But the chow works great for the easy line, for example. So yeah, hopefully I haven't confused you there. I know it's a lot, and I'm not very organized when I explain it. I need to like write things down in an orderly way, but I'm very ADHD. My brain's all over the place. Yes. I wish more people would do it. So I don't know if you're familiar, but in some European countries, they have outlawed certain breeds, English bulldogs and French bulldogs and Cavalier King Charles Spaniels being a couple of them. I don't remember exactly which breed in which countries, but I'm thinking Germany, definitely French bulldog. I've seen breeders working towards changing the standard, basically, to open nares. They're trying to breed away from the DLB2 gene that causes, I believe it's the corkscrew tail, as well as some hemivertebrae and different like spinal deformities. It's what makes you the short back, right? In the breed standard. But the short back is actually a deformity that often causes $10,000 worth in spinal surgeries if they want to save their dog from paralysis. And I just think, first of all, most people don't have the money for that. And people will put down a dog if they can't afford to do the corrective surgery. Snoring and snorting and sometimes gagging. They can't get enough air. They can overheat. So yeah, there's some pretty significant problems that I think that they could be improved upon so much with just a little bit more moderacy. They could still keep the type, a French Bulldog mix in my program, and he is the most healthy, balanced little guy, but he keeps all the cute, adorable traits of the French Bulldog, right? He's got these big eyes, the short nose, and I'm in love with him. But he doesn't have any problem breathing, overheating, no noise at all when he breathes. I x-rayed his back and his perfect spine, straight, full tail, and that he can wag, and it's just, I love it. I just think that there's types for all people, and my breed maybe won't appeal to some as much because it's not very exaggerated. It's not so cartoony, but I have been told that a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't like those other like really extreme dogs, but your moderate dogs are much more my style. So yeah, they'll appeal to some people.
Well, and then you'll also get the people who like something new, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
if they're passionate, they can, maybe help and get on
Yeah.
board on that level.
Well, actually, like you'd think because I'm breeding a dog in Alaska that I would breed a thick coat, but actually The dogs that were bred for northern climates do not need that thick of a coat that they have. They really don't. If they're going to be spending most of their time indoors, which most dogs do, they're uncomfortable most of the time. And my female, she's got a thick enough coat that she can be outside, run around in freezing cold weather for a good hour, and she's fine. So I'm like, that's thick enough coat. She could still be thriving in Florida or somewhere else where it's hot. Like, I don't want a coat that, like, when I see people with chows who live in Florida, it makes my blood boil because I'm like, those poor dogs. I hope they are always inside in an air conditioned house because that's just got to be miserable. So yeah, just making the coat more moderate, I think, is something that not a lot of people are doing because a fluffier coat looks nicer, right? A flat coat is not as striking. But to me, the comfort of the dog's more important.
Talk about the difficulties of getting breeding stock up there in Alaska, or have you felt that pinch as far as that's concerned, or what are some of the
So
things that you've done that's been outside the box to work with people?
yeah, I've had to be outside the box. So the most extreme pure breed snob, they're like, okay, if you're going to develop a new breed, at least only use pure breeds, only use health tested dogs with generations of pedigree, so you know what's predictable. But then they're like, oh, but as soon as you mix, now it's unpredictable. Now, because the entirety of their goal is predictability, this is what they get fixated on. And that is not what I'm fixated on right now. I'm not trying to produce predictability or consistency. Okay, I'm developing something new. There's going to be a lot of unpredictability and inconsistency in the breeding, and that is the only way to do it. If you can't handle that, then you shouldn't be, doing it. So, I have, a range of predicted temperaments from any pairing, and I'm like, okay, for this, I can expect anything that is in that any of the dog breeds gene pool. So like I might select, for example, I used a pure breed Tibetan Spaniel, much more predictable traits than a mix, but you don't necessarily get the traits that you're seeing in the dog in front of you. You might be getting traits from their grandparents or whatever. And so like he was a very dog friendly dog, but two of the puppies ended up being slow to warm and fairly suspicious of new dogs. They're going through a bit of a fear period, but and they'll probably end up less suspicious over time, but without a lot of socialization, they're probably going to be a little bit more prone to be slow to warm to new dogs. But that's okay for that line, and it's okay especially in the beginning because I don't expect to get all the traits that I want to in a single breeding ever in the beginning. Like I'm like, okay, I want to get at least these traits here, these physical and these temperament traits. And if I do, then I'm going to move forward with this breeding prospect. But I have found people with pure breed dogs, some of which are health tested, but some of the dogs that I've found that I want to use are mixes. So for instance, the stud that I used on Rihanna's second litter is a mix. He's a mix that I used 2 years ago with another female. They produce now. Those dogs are almost 2.5 years old, and I really love them. And so I was like, okay, I know what I produced from him. Yes, it's a different female, but I know my female really well, and I've already seen what she produces with another male. So I will use dogs that are mixed, even though it's going to produce a wider range of traits, right? Because now we've got, instead of 5 breeds, we've got maybe 10 that we could be drawing. But that's part of the is I find the people around here, they're like, when they want a mixed breed dog, they just want a dog, and they're like, whatever the dog ends up, like, well, that's what I think makes a lot of these Alaskan dog owners different than maybe in other states where they're more concentrated towards people who want specific things. There's a lot of mixed breeds up here. And there's a lot of people who take two pure breeds and cross them for a specific reason. For instance, two livestock guardian breeds they cross because in their experience it's produced a more stable breed or whatever. A lot of people kind of have their independent ideas about dog breeding up here, and they just are already outside of the box. So there's more people in Alaska, I think, than in some other states. They're open to allowing me to use their dogs in my program. I've found Akita breeders, Chow breeders, Husky breeders, like Golden Retriever, like so many of the top 40 breeds I already have lined up. It's more of a problem with not being able to have the time. I can only raise a certain number of litters a year. And the cost of health testing and the room, the space. So I try to keep a very few dogs in my house, and then I have guardian homes. I'll assess a dog, get to know it really well, and once I know, okay, this is the type of home they need, find a home, they sign a contract that they will allow that dog to be bred a certain number of times. Now, males are easier to find homes for because they just have to allow that dog to stud out, and that's easy, and then they can neuter the dog. But it's harder to find homes for females because they have to either they want to do the litter themselves and I coach them through it, or they have to say goodbye to the dog for a little bit while it's with me, and that's hard. But using a village dog as a foundation female, that's very out of the box. But for people who have developed dog breeds, it's pretty common to find a unique dog that's a mix and be like, oh, wow, we really like this, and try to replicate it by breeding it to other similar dogs and then crossing those together, line breeding. Like some breeds were developed with very, very few foundation dogs. I'm going to be using, I want to make my goal to use the largest number of foundation breeds that's ever been used. And to my knowledge, I think probably the Doggo Argentino is the one with the most breeds that I've heard of. But so I'm sure I'm going to find one that has more breeds than that. But typically there's like a few, like 2 or 3, maybe 4 similar looking and acting breeds that they combine together to create something new. For instance, like the Eurasier. Eurasier is a cross between, it's got some Samoyed and other spits, I think, and Chow. And yeah, so that like that wasn't that hard to create that breed. The Arctic spit, what are they calling it? They've renamed the what's the husky Pomsky? I think it's Arctic Spitz that they're calling it. That's just husky, Pomeranian, and I think American Eskimo, for example, combining those to make a new breed. But I want to use like 40 plus breeds, and that's the challenge of it, is to do it in a way that creates something new, not just a huge variety. There needs to be a recognizable consistency, intent, and aesthetic to be able to use as a breed.
What would you say? Like is this a 10-year, 15-year plan, or you're just not putting a number on it?
Not putting a number on it. Rest of my life, and even then, I will need to find people who really understand my vision. So my goal is, before I die, to create a breed club. I want to approach this in a very different way. But I think maybe I should save this for another interview because it's very in-depth, talking just about the breed club, my ideas about the breed club. It's an entirely different way of approaching things. I probably need to speak in more length about it than we have. I don't know.
Yeah, let's plan on a part 2 about that.
Yeah, because I think I have more original ideas for the breed club and the long-term organization and care of the gene pool than anyone else who's developed, because that was I was looking at what are the pitfalls of managing a gene pool long term. How do you keep it from being bottlenecked and the genetic drift that happens with popular syndrome, and what if economy crashes or there's another world war and people stop breeding for a while? Like, how are you going to protect the integrity of the breeding stock if they all just die? So there's a whole bunch of like protective measures that I want to put in place from the organization level of the breed club to prevent any loss in genetic diversity over time.
You talked about it a few times, but maybe going a little bit in depth. How important is health testing to your program, and what does that look like for you?
So, to most people who are really reputable, doing all the health testing is super, super important. For me, it's more of a, what's the word? It is a benchmark. I want to know what I'm starting with so I can see how I'm progressing. It doesn't mean that I'm going to throw out dogs that have one or two health tests that are not ideal. For example, female, I do pen-hip as well as OFA because pen-hip is a better, it's scientifically, in the sense that it's more objective. I don't know. I'm sure that's a debate, but I really do think pen-hip. But comparing them both is really good because they measure different things. She has mild risk. She wasn't like excellent, right? Or good or excellent. Good or excellent is like great. Mild is kind of like, oh, you know. But she wasn't failing. Her hips aren't failing. It's just not ideal. But the thing is, there's the environmental factors. I did not raise her as a puppy, and I don't know what kind of environment she has. There's their diet and how much traction they have as they're developing their hips when they're young puppies. So not having like super hard and slick surfaces is really important. Not doing a lot of heavy like jumping and impact and stuff like that. Allowing them to run freely on soft surfaces like natural, like forest floor or the yard type of thing. And making sure they've got a good diet. Because I didn't raise her, I don't know what of the environmental, but her offspring, you know, is basically did I move towards my goal or away from my goal when I bred towards the Tibetan Spaniel also was hip tested. But a lot of these breeds haven't been hip tested for many generations. People are just now like, he probably only had hip testing in his pedigree for 2 or 3 generations. That's something, but it's not like decades. So a lot of these health testing are fairly new. And now all of a sudden people are like, oh, if you don't have whatever, the people who have the highest levels of standard there now turn their nose and look down on everyone else who's not washing dogs for the tiniest little thing. And to me, like, I'm prioritizing temperament first. Next is anything that is super rare. So the coat is super rare. So if I have a dog, for instance, my male breeding prospect right now, he's slow to warm with new dogs. That's not an ideal trait, but I'm not going to wash him for it because he's got that really rare coat. So I have to balance the pros and the cons from each dog. And but on the dogs that have like prone to spinal deformities, for example, the Tibetan Spaniel mix, I will X-ray his spine. But I didn't X-ray his mom's spine because she didn't have any dogs that had that risk. So anything that has like Pekingese, Tibetan Spaniel, French Bulldog, Pug, Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, those breeds will need specific tests. Like I'm going to be using a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel that has had MRIs to eliminate the Sherry malformation and because I'm going to be using him with a golden retriever mix, I'm going to be testing her doing an advanced cardiac, and the stud will also have an advanced cardiac. So you have to consider, what are the breed's weaknesses. I'm not going to test all my dogs for advanced cardiac, only the dogs that are prone to heart problems. So, and also recognizing that genetic diversity is really protective for a lot of these things. For instance, wouldn't want to breed a Chihuahua I wouldn't want to ideally breed a Chihuahua to a Pomeranian. They both have risk of luxating patellas. Ideally, I'd like to breed a Chihuahua with a larger dog with a more sturdy structure, right? So those are the kind of thinking about dogs' structural weaknesses. What are their temperament? Them the most dramatically in a single pairing, and move away from that trait as quickly as possible. If that makes sense.